Hi, I'm Alex Piotrowski, and welcome to the Women of Dragon Age. Here, we'll explore just a few of the important women in the Dragon Age series, and how the game treats its female characters. Ultimately, I think that, although the armor in the first game could have been better, attention game designers, that is not how women's chests work. Women in the Dragon Age series are very important characters, and largely treated well. There are several women in positions of power throughout the series. More of the player characters are women, as all of mine have been, all with duties of varying seriousness.
I hear you judge wrongs among your people, Inquisitor. If you are willing, I ask you to judge Storvaker.
I'm sorry.
As a warrior of our hold, Storvaker should have died rather than submit to the vile ritual the Jaws of Hakon had prepared. It is unclear whether the Augur or I should judge such a thing. You are here. I would be grateful.
Very well. I wouldn't want life in the hold to become unbearable.
Ugh. Storvaker, will you speak to the hold for your deeds?
Storvaker, I demand an unflattering report of your performance as Hold Beast. It will be recited to you every day for 1 week. I trust this is sufficient embarrassment?
But let's start at the beginning. Literally. In the Dragon Age Origins main quest, Nature of the Beast, the player's character, the Warden, meets a nomadic clan of elves, a subset of elves who call themselves the Dalish. Upon arriving, they are taken to the clan's leader, Keeper Zathrian, who explains that the clan is currently under attack by a local group of werewolves, and cannot assist the Warden in his or her ultimate quest unless the werewolf situation is resolved. Preoccupied with this disaster, Zathrian redirects the Warden to his first, an apprentice of sorts, a woman named Lanaya. Lanaya greets the Warden, and after a short introductory conversation where Lanaya reveals that she was born amongst humans, the Warden can ask how she came to be with the Dalish clan. Lanaya explains it this way.
My parents were servants to a human merchant whose caravans plied the southern routes. One day, bandits killed him, and my parents both. I was the only survivor, just a young girl, and the bandits took me. I was their servant for several years. The bandits killed a scout when the clan passed near their camp. When the clan discovered him, Zathrian came looking for his killers.
If the Warden expresses their sympathies, Lanaya replies with this.
It was. The long years of reflection have allowed me to come to terms with it, to put them in perspective. I can only imagine what would have happened had the clan not saved me from them. I owe them my life for that, and more.
I always got the subtle suggestion that Lanaya served those humans sexually, as well as in other ways. If her reaction to such a heinous act seems somewhat disingenuous, you're not alone in thinking that. She does show some emotion here.
When he finally caught up to us, he fell on the bandits like a terror. No one could stop him. I sat there and I watched him attack them in a blur, and I reveled in every blow.
But her response still seems flat, despite the many years of reflection she's gone through in order to forgive the humans that wronged her. Her explanation for her serenity if the Warden points it out. Lanaya can also be persuaded to tell the Warden that Zathrian is very old and has been the clan's keeper for a very long time, and that he has lost much over that long lifetime, though she does not know the story. If asked, Zathrian blames the werewolves, but after a long trek through the forest, the werewolves insisting all the while that the Warden doesn't know the whole story, the Warden can choose to speak to the wolves and the spirit they consider their leader, coincidentally, also a woman. From the pack of werewolves and the spirit, they find out that Zathrian's past is quite similar to Lanaya's.
It was Zathrian who created the curse that these creatures suffer. The same curse that Zathrian's own people now suffer. Centuries ago, when the Dalish first came to this land, a tribe of humans lived close to this forest. They sought to drive the Dalish away. Zathrian was a young man then. He had a son and daughter he loved greatly. And while out hunting, the human tribe captured them both.
The humans tortured the boy killed him. The girl they raped and left for dead. The Dalish found her, but she learned later she was with child. She killed herself. Zathrian came to this ruin and summoned a terrible spirit, binding it to the body of a great wolf. So Witherfang came to be. Witherfang hunted the humans of the tribe. Many were killed, but others were cursed by his blood, becoming twisted and savage creatures.
Twisted and savage, just as Witherfang himself is.
Obviously, Zathrian chose to deal with his rage and resentment differently than Lanaya did, though Zathrian's experiences are perhaps why he was so ruthless in his treatment of the bandits who captured Lanaya while she was still young. Still, Zathrian admits that he cannot do what Lanaya did.
I cannot do as you ask, Spirit. I am too old to know mercy. This hatred in me is like an ancient, gnarled root. It has consumed my soul.
He can still be persuaded, after a battle, hence any strange effects you might see on the characters in the video here, to end the curse he laid on the werewolves, thus curing the plague inflicted upon his own clan as well. Zathrian's rage and need for revenge is easier to believe than Lanaya's, but Zathrian and Lanaya also show two different ways of dealing with trauma, and actually, both of their responses conform at least a little to an outdated gender stereotype. Zathrian's unending rage, for example, is a great example of the stereotype of males to show aggression and stray away from the more mild or tender emotions. While this might not be true of all men anymore, it was at one point considered effeminate, or at least emasculating, for men to express emotions that were not anger, or perhaps enthusiasm for something like a sport. Lanaya's relatively accommodating personality, on the other hand, is fairly typical of what a woman might be expected to act like, despite a party of potentially 4 humans, depending on the makeup of the player's party, arriving at her camp and asking her to send her clansmen to aid them in a war. Despite this, Lanaya's response is healthier than Zathrian's. Lanaya was able to overcome her trauma and still turn out to be a good person, even beating native Dalish elves for the position as Zathrian's first. Zathrian, however...
All I see are the faces of my children, my people. I cannot do it.
...was unable to move on, and his resentment poisoned him until all he knew was his anger. In my game, Zathrian always ends the curse, and Lanaya becomes the new keeper of the Dalish clan, and according to the game's epilogue slides, she leads well. The new keeper, Lanaya, was respected both amongst the Dalish as well as in the Freldon court. She was a voice of reason, and other Dalish clans would turn to her to help resolve disputes with the human folk. Only Keeper Lanaya's leadership kept peace alive. A strong female leader, able to patch up the rocky relations between the humans and elves of Ferelden despite what she had been through. That's one of the best ways of overcoming trauma I've seen, even if she might be repressing some of her feelings a little. While our favorite warden is off saving the cursed humans and elves, the little town of Lothering is being destroyed by the Darkspawn. How quaint. The protagonist of Dragon Age 2, pick your own first name Hawk, and his or her family are fleeing their hometown of Lothering. Leandra, the family matriarch, suggests crossing the sea to Kirkwall, where she grew up and where her brother Gamlen still lives. Before they can get to the port city, they encounter a powerful figure from the first game, Flemeth, a fabled and feared witch of the wilds, who can turn into a dragon by the way, and one of Hawk's siblings dies. Fast forward several years, and Hawk is rubbing elbows with the people of power in Kirkwall, 2 of whom are women. Grand Cleric Althena, leader of Kirkwall's Chantry and in the Chantry hierarchy, second only to Divine Justinia, who is kind of like their version of the Pope. Knight Commander Meredith, the leader of the city's Templars, and, at least in name, defender of its mages, dedicated to, some would say obsessed with, rooting out forbidden magic in Kirkwall. And the man that makes the trio, First Enchanter Orsino, leader of the city's Circle of Magi, housed in the former Gallows prison, who insists that the harder Meredith pushes against blood magic, the forbidden magic, the more desperate the mages will become. Hawke, at this point, has made a name for him or herself in the city, and with the Grand Cleric remaining neutral in the Great Kirkwall Mage debate, Meredith and Orsino turn to Hawke to justify their positions. This is the conflict as it stands at the beginning of Act 3, the beginning of the end of the game. Though he or she is the main character, and mine is totally awesome, Hawke isn't who I want to focus on here. Let's take a look at Kirkwall's Trinity of Power, and what happens to them at the end of the game. Grand Cleric Althena has remained neutral in the Mage Templar debate, and even shrugs it off when a Chantry Mother is killed by Kunari arrows right in front of her. Granted, for most players, I think there's no love lost there. This Chantry Mother did try to frame Hawke for murder, and there's a pretty good chance she fanned the flames of hate between Kirkwall Andrastians and the Kunari that were in Kirkwall at the time. But Grand Cleric Althena walking coolly away from the scene as Mother Patrice keels over dead earned an Alex greatly approves from me. She is also the one to step in at the beginning of Act 3 when Meredith and Orsino are attempting to force Hawke to side with one of them. Hawke can remain neutral at this point, though Hawke's intercession allows both characters to air their points of view rather than actually stopping their fighting. Grand Cleric Althena? She gives them a good scolding. Observe.
Ah, Orsino. So frustrated. Do you think this is truly wise?
No, Your Grace.
Of course not. Young men, would you show the first enchanter back to the circle? Gently, if you please.
Your Grace. He should be clapped in irons, made an example of.
That's enough, Meredith. This demeans us all. Surely you can see that. Go back to the gallows and calm down, like a good girl.
Although there are differing opinions as to whether or not Althena is actually a strong character, the influence she has over Knight Commander Meredith especially, who has effectively become the leader of the city, suggests to me that she can hold her own. So does how Meredith reacts to her death at the end of the game. More on that in a minute. Meredith's name is thrown around a lot before we actually meet the woman. In literature, this is a tactic that's usually used to show the power a person holds, since their reputation precedes them, and to give the reader an impression of the character before they actually meet them. My impression of Knight Commander Meredith was one of intimidation, and sort of confusion. My Hawke was a mage, and rumor around the Kirkwall streets was that Meredith was having any mage outside the circle of magi, which Hawke obviously was, turned into effectively a drooling vegetable faster than you could say blood magic. And yet, she saved my character from an attack, and after I badgered them a bit, she and Orsino actually agreed to work together during a siege on Kirkwall. She is the one who names Hawke Champion of Kirkwall, who tolerates Hawke's magic as long as it is used in service of the city, if Hawke is a mage, and she actually has a point when she talks about the use of blood magic. It does happen. In fact, it happens to Hawke's mother, and Meredith throws that in Hawke's face during a debate, which is totally a low blow. And blood magic is forbidden, because it often involves working with demons. But Orsino, who seems to be a voice of reason against Meredith, points out that a lot of these people are desperate when they turn to blood magic. They fear for their lives or the lives of their families, and see dealing with a demon as the only way out. Eventually, some of the mages Meredith turns tranquil, the drooling vegetable thing I mentioned before, are people who haven't actually used blood magic at all, and who, by Chantry law, which decides matters of magic, can't be made tranquil. She does it because the people are scared. At least for a while, their fears and hers seem justified, but you just know it's going to come to blows at some point. At the very end of the game, one of Hawke's party members, a fellow apostate named Anders, blows up Kirkwall's Chantry in a grand, almost futuristic-looking explosion, killing Grand Cleric Althena in the process. Meredith's reaction to this? Call the Templars, all the mages in Kirkwall must die. And Hawke too, even if he or she isn't a mage, if Hawke chooses to side with the mages at this point. Orsino argues that this seems like a bit of an overreaction. None of the Circle mages were at fault for this. Meredith points out, however, that the people of Kirkwall, and indeed the rest of Thedas, will call for retribution. and this is what she can do to help ease their minds, though whether or not it's actually justified is seriously in question. She is, it appears, still trying to think about the people here, and even though she has been incredibly firm throughout the game, and somewhat adversarial to a Magehawk, she makes very good arguments. Though we could probably label her an antagonist depending on which side the player chooses, calling her a villain up until this point is going pretty far. This is, of course, where the final battle of the game takes place, and you'd think that depending on the side you pick, you'd have to fight either Meredith or Orsino, right? Wrong. You fight both, because they both go absolutely crazy at the end of the game. The way my game plays out, Orsino actually goes first. He declares that if Meredith expects blood magic, she'll get blood magic, and he turns into, well, this. Gross, right? And it doesn't make any sense. Characters in the next game even admit that it doesn't make any sense.
In the book, you say that first Enchanter Orsino turned himself into a giant monster made of corpses. How? Why?
Do I look like an expert on magical weirdness to you? Well, I can't tell you how. For the why, all I can say is he was desperate.
But Orsino, like all those who have turned to blood magic before him, feels the situation is hopeless, asking, why don't they just drown us as infants? Even so, Hawke has to fight the leaders of both the Mages and the Templars. Speaking of which, Meredith. She's demanded Hawke's death, and acquired a sword made from a special form of magical stone called lyrium that has caused her to become kind of paranoid, accusing everyone present, even her Templars, of blood magic. She quotes verses from the Chant of Light as she fights, believing herself to be the only one who has not been corrupted. Her lyrium sword is influencing her mind, and it is entirely possible that it has been for the whole game, which is why her attempts to control the blood magic she has begun to see everywhere have become progressively harsher and harsher. Here's why I bring this up. The death of Grand Cleric Althena, the voice of reason in these disputes, is the catalyst for what becomes an all-out war between the Mages and the Templars that begins in Kirkwall. That is how important that female character was. Although I think her ability to scold the prominent figureheads of the city into submission makes her a great character, regardless of opinion, she was an essential character. As for Meredith and Orsino, the game writers could very easily have made Meredith the crazy one, the villain, casting her in a negative light and turning her surprisingly good intentions around for the final fight of the game. Instead, we get, effectively, two boss battles, one with Orsino and one with Meredith. That Orsino also makes decisions at the very end of Dragon Age 2 that are inconsistent with what the player has seen of his character brings him onto a comparable level with Meredith, so that Meredith isn't simply the crazy woman. If anything, I think Orsino's decisions make even less sense than Meredith's. Templars use lyrium in liquid form all the time, so she got herself a shiny new sword with the stuff embedded in it, and how could she have known that that was going to warp her mind, and turn her into a lyrium statue at the end of the game? But anyway, placing them on the same level as antagonists at the conclusion of the game, based on their decisions, means that Meredith, as a female, isn't separated out. She isn't the only one who loses it, and I think that's a good thing. Gender equality in Thedas! So, at this point, we've covered a lot of stuff in the first two games of the series. In the third installment, Dragon Age Inquisition, there's a lot of focus on the Chantry, which elevates women in much of Thedas in a way that men cannot be, so I wanted to finish up with that. For those who don't know, the Chantry is a lot like our Christian church. There are brothers and sisters, grand clerics like Althena, and their divine is pretty much akin to the Pope, except that to hold any significant rank in the Orlesian Chantry, the version of the Chantry accepted across much of Thedas, one must be female. This is because the prophet of the Maker, their analog of God, was a woman, and she was not his daughter, but his bride. Spiritually, anyway. Her name was Andraste, and her actual physical husband, Mafarath, betrayed her to those who wanted her dead, and allowed them to capture and kill her. Many Andrastians, people who follow the Chantry, allow it to wholly guide their lives, even if they don't pledge themselves to it and become a brother or sister of the Chantry. Andraste was not just a woman who was elevated by the Maker and who first spoke the Chant of Light, which is akin to the Chantry's Bible. Andraste was also a warrior and led her people into battle. Thus, the Chant of Light is often invoked before and during battle by the faithful to give them strength from Andraste.
Blessed are they who stand before the corrupt and the wicked and do not falter. You have come far, my friend. It has been an honor.
The people who wanted Andraste dead came from a place in Thedas called the Tevinter Imperium, and the rest of Thedas looks at Tevinter like it's a little bit backwards. Their chantry is the opposite of the Orlesian chantry. Their divine is male, their highest priests are male, etc. They still believe in mostly the same things, except that they interpret the bit Andraste said about magic differently. Whereas mages in the rest of Thedas, until the whole Kirkwall thing, were trained in circles and not allowed to hold positions of power except within and connected to the circles. Mages in Tevinter walked the streets freely, practicing magic at a whim, and were allowed to hold positions of power. Actually, just about every position of power in Tevinter government is held by a mage, and a lot of them are men. Their divine is always male, and their archon, like a king or president, is also male, more often than not. To have a shot at even a mediocre life in Tevinter, one must either be a mage, or be very wealthy and know a lot of mages. They also still use slave labor, a practice that officially the rest of Thedas is condemned. So, Tevinter and the Imperial Chantry actually have a lot in common with us real-world people, or at least how we used to be. Real life, we used to use slave labor. Again, now we condemn that practice and are attempting to atone for it, just as many people in the areas of Thedas outside Tevinter are. But where we still have something in common with Tevinter is our practice of men in power, men dominating the church, etc. In Thedas, even in Saharan, where the very misunderstood and unknown Kunari reside, their priesthood is run primarily by women, who interpret their philosophers and hand down those interpretations. It should be noted that the Kunari and the Imperium have been at war, on and off, for about 200 years at this point in the game. It leads me to wonder, if Tevinter is judged to be so backwards, and we have some important things in common with them out here in the real world, what does that say about us, and how we rule ourselves and treat our women, our people? I could go on and on about the individual awesome women in the Dragon Age series. I have a few favorite characters I didn't even get to touch on here, but that would take as long to talk about as it would for you to just go and see for yourself. The Dragon Age series is full of complex female characters, strong women who shape the world around them independent of the player character, and who aren't afraid to fight and die for what they believe in. This is Alex, signing off.